A knight kneels in a ruined chapel, seeking a sacred cup he will never find. The ultimate treasure of the Holy Grail may not be an object at all, but the story itself. For over 1,000 years, this single legend has woven together threads of ancient myth, profound faith, and insoluble mystery, captivating kings and commoners alike. It is history's most soothing and elusive tale. By the end of our journey, you will understand not just where this story began, but why its call remains so powerful in our modern world. We will trace its path from magical Celtic cauldrons to shadowy medieval knights, and from silver screen adventures to our deepest psychological yearnings. What secret does the Grail truly guard, and why have so many searched for it in vain? What does this ancient story reflect about our own endless quests for meaning? Which interpretation of this timeless legend feels most true to you? Long before the word Grail was ever whispered in a church, the ancient forests of Britain and Ireland held a different kind of sacred vessel. In the flickering firelight of a chieftain's hall, bards would sing not of a cup but of a cauldron. These were not ordinary pots for cooking stew. They were objects of immense power and mystery, central to the oldest myths of the Celtic world. One of the most famous belonged to the Dagda, a father god of the Tuatha De Danann. His cauldron was said to be bottomless, capable of feeding an entire army without ever emptying. It was a symbol of inexhaustible abundance, of a leader's promise to provide for his people no matter the hardship. Think of the deepest hunger you have ever felt, not just for food, but for security, for certainty in an uncertain world. The Dagda's cauldron answered that hunger. It represented a covenant with the land itself, a guarantee that life would continue. But another cauldron promised something even more profound than full bellies. This was the cauldron of Ceridwen, a goddess of transformation. Her story is one of poetic accident and divine inspiration. Ceridwen brewed a potion in her cauldron for a year and a day, a concoction meant to grant supreme wisdom and the gift of prophecy. The intended recipient was her son, but 3 drops of the bubbling liquid splashed onto the thumb of her servant, a boy named Gwion. Instinctively, he put his thumb to his mouth and swallowed the drops. In that instant, he was filled with all the knowledge the brew contained. He gained the sight, understanding the past, present, and future. Furious, Ceridwen pursued him, leading to a shape-shifting chase where they transformed into various animals, until finally, as a grain of wheat, Gwion was eaten by Ceridwen in the form of a hen. She later gave birth to him anew, and he became the greatest bard of all, Taliesin. This cauldron did not offer food, it offered enlightenment. It was a vessel of rebirth where old forms were dissolved and new, wiser ones emerged. The seeker who partook of its contents was fundamentally, irrevocably changed. So here, in the misty origins of Europe, we find the deep roots of the Grail idea. These Celtic cauldrons were not passive objects, they were active, magical sources. They provided what every society and every soul fundamentally needs: sustenance for the body and awakening for the spirit. They were symbols of sovereignty, the right to rule tied to the ability to nourish and inspire. They spoke of cycles, of death and rebirth, of endless renewal. When Christian monks later began to write down the legends of their converted lands, these powerful, ingrained symbols did not simply vanish. They lingered in the collective imagination, a primordial template waiting for a new story. The sacred container was already there, etched into the culture's subconscious. It just needed a new name and a new context. The vessel of endless plenty and transformative wisdom was poised to become the cup of a different kind of eternal life. The ancient cauldrons of Celtic myth held a promise of endless renewal, a template for a sacred vessel that would one day hold the world's greatest hope. That transformation began not in a bard's tale, but within the quiet intensity of an upstairs room in Jerusalem. The biblical Gospels, written decades after the events they describe, offer only the briefest of mentions. During the Last Supper, Jesus shares a cup of wine with his disciples, telling them it represents a new covenant in his blood. The object itself is not described. It is simply a vessel, a common cup for a profoundly uncommon moment. Yet in that simplicity lies its immense power. This ordinary cup became the first tangible link between the divine and the everyday, a physical object present at the foundational ritual of the Christian faith. But the story of this vessel did not end with the wine. Its journey and its legendary status truly began with a man standing in the shadow of the cross. That man was Joseph of Arimathea, a wealthy and secret follower of Jesus. The Gospels note that after the crucifixion, Joseph courageously asked the Roman governor for Jesus' body. Using his own resources, he provided a clean linen shroud and a new tomb for a proper burial. Early Christian tradition, however, began to weave a more detailed tapestry around this compassionate figure. By the 2nd and 3rd centuries, stories circulated that Joseph did more than just claim the body. He was said to have been present at the crucifixion itself, and there he used the very cup from the Last Supper to catch the blood and water that flowed from the wound in Jesus' side. In one profound act, the vessel that had held the symbolic blood of the new covenant now held the physical, sanctified blood of the sacrifice itself. This was the moment the Grail was born in the Christian imagination. It was no longer just a cup, it became a relic of unparalleled holiness, a container of the divine essence. This idea resonated powerfully in the early Christian world, where reverence for physical objects connected to saints and martyrs was growing. People longed for a tangible connection to the holy, something they could see, or at least believe in, that bridged the vast gap between heaven and earth. A bone, a piece of cloth, a vial of dust, these relics were seen as conduits of grace, objects imbued with spiritual power through their contact with the sacred. What then could be more powerful than the vessel that held the very blood of Christ? Joseph of Arimathea, in this tradition, became the Grail's first guardian. He was now the keeper of the ultimate relic, and his fate became inextricably linked to its destiny. Legends would soon send him on a long westward journey, carrying this sacred charge into lands that still remembered their own stories of magical cauldrons. The Celtic symbol of endless renewal was about to meet the Christian vessel of eternal salvation, and their fusion would create a legend for the ages. The vessel that held the sacred blood needed a story worthy of its power. It would find its first great storyteller not in a holy land, but in the glittering courts of 12th century France. His name was Chrétien de Troyes, a master poet who wove together Celtic folklore, chivalric ideals, and the spiritual yearning of his age. Around the year 1180, he began his final and most mysterious work, Percival, the Story of the Grail. In this unfinished romance, he gave the world the literary blueprint for everything the Holy Grail would become. Yet what Chrétien describes is strangely, wonderfully different from the Christian relic. His hero, Percival, is a naive young man raised in the forest, ignorant of knighthood. After a clumsy start, he finds himself a guest at the remote castle of a wounded nobleman known as the Fisher King. There he witnesses a solemn, silent procession. A squire carries a bleeding lance, maidens follow with ornate candelabras. Then comes a dazzling object that captivates Percival's eyes. Chrétien calls it simply a grail. He writes that it is made of fine, pure gold and studded with precious jewels, but crucially, it is not a cup. Chrétien describes it as a deep serving dish, a plat. And its wonder is not in holding blood, but in its function. This grail, carried by a maiden, passes through the hall and into another chamber. From it, a single mass wafer is presented to sustain the ailing Fisher King, his sole sustenance. Here, the Grail is a source of miraculous nourishment, echoing those ancient Celtic cauldrons, yet placed in a clearly Christian context with the Eucharistic wafer. Chrétien masterfully layers the mystery. He introduces the wounded king, whose infirmity is mysteriously linked to the health of his lands, a concept later known as the wasteland. He presents the Grail not as a goal to be seized, but as a profound question to be understood, and he gives us the hero's catastrophic human failure. Moved by the procession, Percival is burning with curiosity, but he has been taught that a polite knight does not ask too many questions, so he remains silent. He goes to bed, and in the morning the castle is empty, the chance gone. He later learns that if he had simply asked whom the Grail served, the Fisher King would have been healed and his lands restored. Percival's failure is not one of strength or courage, but of empathy and inquisitiveness. The quest, therefore, becomes an inner journey toward wisdom and compassion. With this unfinished tale, Chrétien de Troyes set the essential template. The Grail was now an elusive treasure in a remote castle, guarded by a wounded keeper, linked to a blighted land, and attainable only by the knight who asks the right question. He left the story incomplete, a puzzle without an answer, and in that open space, the imaginations of countless other writers would rush in, eager to solve the mystery he so brilliantly created. Chrétien de Troyes left the Grail shrouded in mystical silence, a question without an answer. But within a generation, another poet stepped forward to provide one, weaving the threads of folklore and faith into a single, sacred tapestry. His name was Robert de Boron, and in his work the Grail ceased to be a mysterious serving dish and became definitively the Holy Grail. Robert's great innovation was to anchor the entire legend firmly in the bedrock of Christian scripture and history. He began his story not in a magical forest, but in the upper room in Jerusalem. In his version, written around the year 1200, the Grail is explicitly identified as the very cup used by Jesus at the Last Supper. This simple act of naming transformed it from a symbol into a relic, the most precious physical object in all of Christendom. Robert then gave the Grail a guardian and a clear lineage. He expanded the role of Joseph of Arimathea, making him not just the man who provided the tomb, but the one who used that sacred cup to collect the blood and water from the side of the crucified Christ. Joseph, imprisoned for his faith, is sustained in his cell by the Grail itself, a divine presence that nourishes him. Upon his release, he is charged with a sacred mission to protect the vessel and lead a community of keepers westward. This was the birth of the Grail dynasty, a sacred bloodline of guardians chosen by God to protect this ultimate relic. The Grail, in Robert's vision, was no longer just an object of quest, it was a source of divine grace and the focal point of a holy community. Its power was not merely magical, it was sacramental, directly connected to the sacrifice of Christ. This idea resonated powerfully in a medieval world deeply concerned with lineage, sanctity, and the tangible presence of the holy. The wandering, mystical quest described by Chrétien was now given a profound spiritual purpose and a historical origin story. The knights who sought it were not just adventurers, they were participants in sacred history, trying to reconnect with a grace that had been physically present at the dawn of their faith. Robert de Boron's version did not replace the older tales, it built upon them, baptizing the Celtic cauldron of plenty with the blood of Christ. He provided the why that Chrétien had omitted. Why was the Fisher King wounded? It was a spiritual malady connected to this sacred history. Why did the land lie waste? It reflected a broken covenant with the divine. The quest became a mission of restoration, of healing a rupture in the spiritual order itself. With this masterstroke, Robert ensured the Grail legend would forever hold a dual power, both as an exciting knightly adventure and as a profound allegory for the soul's search for redemption. The vessel was now complete, waiting only for its greatest knights to step forward and seek it. The quest now had a sacred origin and a spiritual purpose, but it was still a solitary story, separate from the grandest legend of the medieval world. That all changed in the 13th century when a group of anonymous French monks and writers undertook a monumental task. They wove every thread, every character, every adventure into a single, sprawling tapestry of prose. This massive collection, known today as the Vulgate Cycle or the Lancelot Grail, became the definitive Arthurian Bible for centuries, and at the very heart of this epic, they placed the quest for the Holy Grail as the ultimate crowning achievement of knighthood. This was the grand synthesis where myth became scripture. In this cycle, the stories of King Arthur, Queen Guinevere, and Sir Lancelot were no longer just entertaining romances. They became a grand cosmic drama, a prelude to a divine test. The Vulgate cycle established a clear hierarchy of knights. At its base was the worldly chivalry of the Round Table, focused on battles, courtly love, and earthly glory. This was embodied by Lancelot, the greatest knight in the world, but a knight tragically flawed by his forbidden love for Guinevere. His sin, however noble his heart, barred him from the Grail's highest mystery. He could catch glimpses of it, but never achieve it. The quest demanded a new kind of hero, one of perfect spiritual purity rather than martial perfection. That hero was Galahad, Lancelot's own son. His conception itself was orchestrated by divine design, and he was raised in a nunnery, untouched by the corrupting influences of the worldly court. When he finally arrives at Camelot and takes the siege perilous, the empty seat at the Round Table reserved for the worthiest knight, the Grail itself appears covered in white samite, filling the hall with wondrous fragrances and feeding every knight with the food he desires most. The quest is no longer a personal adventure for a single knight like Percival. It is a mass exodus. The entire fellowship of the Round Table swears to seek the Grail, but the cycle makes it devastatingly clear that most are utterly unworthy. Knights who relied on strength and pride are humiliated, lost in forests, or killed. The quest becomes a brutal filter, separating earthly chivalry from heavenly grace. Only 3 knights ultimately succeed: Percival, the humble knight Bors, and Galahad as their leader. The Vulgate cycle also gave the Grail an elaborate history in Britain, connecting it directly to the land's spiritual destiny. It detailed how Joseph of Arimathea, now the first bishop of the Grail, brought the sacred vessel to Glastonbury, a place already rich with Celtic otherworldly associations. There he established a line of Grail kings, the last of whom was the wounded Fisher King. This created a powerful link. The holiest relic of Christendom was now physically present in the soil of Arthur's kingdom, making Britain a new holy land. By integrating the Grail so completely with Arthur, Lancelot, and the fall of Camelot, the anonymous authors did something profound. They made the Grail quest the spiritual climax of the entire Arthurian saga. The Round Table's greatest endeavor was not conquering an empire but seeking divine grace. Its ultimate failure, with most knights returning broken or not at all, foreshadowed the moral decay that would lead to Camelot's collapse. In doing so, they cemented the Grail's place not just in literature but in the very soul of popular culture. It was no longer a niche mystical tale. It was the highest aspiration of the world's most famous heroes, a symbol of a purity so rare it could only be glimpsed before vanishing from the world. What happens when such a perfect object is finally found by a perfect knight? The answer would transform the Grail from a goal into a vanishing point. Sir Galahad's arrival at Camelot is less an entrance and more of a divine intrusion. He does not earn his place through deeds, it is his birthright. The siege perilous, the deadly empty seat at the Round Table accepts him without harm. When he draws the sword from the stone, it is not a test of strength but a confirmation of a preordained status. He is the knight without flaw, without sin, and crucially, without any meaningful human connection. His purity is his entire identity, a state of being so perfect it renders him almost alien to the other knights. Compare him to his own father, Lancelot. Lancelot is a torrent of human emotion, the greatest warrior alive, yet torn apart by his passionate, forbidden love for Guinevere. He is strength and weakness intertwined, a figure of majestic failure we can understand. Percival, too, is deeply human. He begins in ignorance, fails through silence, and learns through painful experience. His quest is a journey of growth. Galahad, however, has no journey. He is the destination, already complete from the moment he appears. He represents an impossible ideal, divine election made flesh. He is not meant to be relatable, he is meant to be awe-inspiring, a living symbol of a grace so absolute it exists beyond the realm of human struggle. This absolute purity is the only key that can unlock the Grail's final mystery. When Galahad, accompanied by Percival and Bors, finally reaches the Grail castle, the culmination is not a battle but a transcendent vision. They witness the Grail unveiled, not as a physical cup, but as the direct manifestation of divine presence. In a moment of sublime grace, Christ himself emerges from the vessel to serve the knights a celestial mass. For Galahad, this vision answers every question. He has achieved the ultimate spiritual union, the goal of all mystical seeking, and here lies the profound tragedy woven into the legend. The achievement of this perfect ideal is incompatible with the continuation of the imperfect human world of Camelot. Having seen the face of God, Galahad asks for one thing: to die. His prayer is granted, his soul is borne to heaven by angels, and the Grail ascends with him, vanishing forever from the mortal realm. The message is devastatingly clear. Ultimate spiritual fulfillment exists in a realm separate from, and even destructive to, worldly community. Galahad cannot return to the Round Table and tell his tale. He cannot use his purity to heal the political rifts or mend the broken loyalties at Camelot. His success literally removes the source of divine grace from the world. The quest, intended to restore the wasteland, ends by creating a new kind of spiritual desolation. The greatest knights are dead or departed, and those who return, like Lancelot and a heartbroken Percival, are forever changed, unable to reintegrate into the court's fading glory. The Grail's achievement does not save Arthur's kingdom, it accelerates its doom. It suggests that the highest calling may require leaving the community behind, that perfect purity and human society cannot coexist. The Grail, in the end, is not a treasure for a kingdom, but a solitary vision for a saint. And once that vision is granted, the world is left a little darker, a little emptier, wondering what to do now that the ultimate goal has been reached and has proven to be a farewell. Galahad's perfect vision of the Grail was a cup, but that was only one face of a many-sided mystery. The truth is, across the centuries, the Holy Grail refused to be pinned down to a single shape. It was a shape-shifter of the imagination, transforming to reflect the deepest desires of the culture that dreamed it. Take, for instance, the startling version created by a German knight and poet named Wolfram von Eschenbach around the year 1210. In his epic Parzival, he boldly dismisses the idea of a cup altogether. For Wolfram, the Grail is something far more strange and wondrous, a stone. He calls it the lapsit exilis, a name that echoes with mystery, perhaps meaning the stone that fell from heaven. This is no ordinary rock. Wolfram describes it as the purest thing, a jewel of such power that it sustains life itself. It provides an endless feast, materializing any food or drink one could desire right upon its surface, much like those ancient Celtic cauldrons of plenty. But its power goes further. Merely gazing upon the stone each year is said to halt the process of aging, granting a form of eternal youth to the blessed knights of the Grail castle, the Templisen. In Wolfram's hands, the Grail becomes less a Christian relic and more a philosopher's stone, a cosmic source of earthly abundance and vitality, guarded by a sacred order of warrior monks. It is a symbol of nature's boundless generosity, a gift from the stars. This stands in stark contrast to the very first literary Grail, the one in Chrétien de Troyes' unfinished poem. Remember, Chrétien never called it a cup. He described it as a graal, a deep-serving dish or platter made of gold and jewels, a vessel that carried a single consecrated wafer to sustain the wounded fisher king. Here, the emphasis is on sacred sustenance, a direct, miraculous feeding that links to the Christian Eucharist but retains the form of a grand ceremonial plate. And then there are the versions where the Grail ceases to be a physical object at all. In the highest mystical traditions of the quest, particularly in the stories of Galahad, the Grail is ultimately a vision. The knights do not seize a golden cup and bring it back to Camelot. They witness a spiritual phenomenon, a radiant light, a divine presence that emerges from a vessel and then vanishes. The object is merely a temporary container for an experience of grace that cannot be contained. In these moments, the Grail is pure revelation, a glimpse of the divine that transforms the witness but cannot be owned or displayed. So what are we to make of this? A stone, a dish, a cup, a fleeting light? The Grail's true nature lies not in its material form but in its function. It is always a source of endless food, of healing, of youth, of divine wisdom, of direct communion with God. Its physical description changes to highlight which aspect of that divine nourishment the storyteller and their audience yearned for most deeply. Was it the promise of a land that would never know famine? Then the Grail was a stone or a cauldron. Was it the hope for spiritual redemption and a direct line to Christ's sacrifice? Then it became the sacred chalice. The Grail's genius is its emptiness, its ability to be filled with whatever a society or a searching heart needs it to be. It is the ultimate symbol precisely because it has no fixed symbol. It is a mirror reflecting back our greatest hungers, and if the object itself is so elusive, where on earth could such a thing possibly be hidden? The answer would launch 1,000 searches, from gloomy English abbeys to sun-drenched mountain peaks in the New World. The Grail's final vanishing act with Sir Galahad leaves a haunting question: what happens to the kingdom left behind? The legend provides a stark and unforgettable answer in its most potent symbol, the wasteland. This is not merely a barren field or a cursed forest. It is a state of absolute desolation where rivers run dry, crops wither in the soil, and the very seasons seem to have forgotten the land. The people live in a state of listless despair, going through the motions of life without any joy or purpose. And at the center of this blighted realm sits its ruler, the Fisher King, also called the Maimed King. He is perpetually wounded, often in the thigh or groin, a wound that will not heal. He is alive, but he cannot live. He spends his days in his shadowy castle, often fishing in a nearby river, a passive observer of the ruin his kingdom has become. The connection is explicit and profound. The king's incurable wound and the land's infertility are one and the same sickness. His personal, spiritual paralysis has manifested as an environmental and social catastrophe. This is the legend's masterstroke of psychological allegory. The king represents the ruling consciousness, the guiding spirit of a person or a society. His wound is a trauma, a sin of omission, a deep-seated guilt, or a fundamental disconnection from life's source. In the medieval mind, this was often interpreted as a spiritual failing, a turning away from God's grace. The Fisher King's impotence is a symbol of creative and generative power that has been blocked or wounded. And because the king and his land are a single organism, his inner sickness becomes an outer reality. The wasteland is what happens when leadership, whether of a nation or of one's own soul, becomes stagnant, self-absorbed, and cut off from compassion and vitality. It is depression made visible on a landscape. It is a culture that has lost its story, its sense of meaning. Think of a time when you felt profoundly stuck, when a personal grief or failure seemed to color your entire world gray, making everything feel pointless and barren. That is the wasteland on a personal scale. Now the quest, the knight who stumbles upon the Grail castle, like Percival, is presented with a surreal, silent pageant, the Grail procession. He sees the wondrous vessel, the bleeding lance, but he is confused. The old rules of knighthood do not apply here. This is not a dragon to slay or a tyrant to overthrow. The solution is deceptively simple, yet it requires a radical shift from action to empathy. The knight must ask a question, not a strategic question about the Grail's power, but a compassionate, human one. Whom does the Grail serve, or in some versions, what ails you? This question is the key. It represents turning outward with genuine concern. It is an act of seeing the suffering of another and daring to inquire about it. Percival's initial failure is our failure. We are often so preoccupied with the mystery, with the potential prize, with our own confusion, that we forget to simply acknowledge the pain right in front of us. The question is the healing. By asking it, the knight acknowledges the king's suffering, breaks the spell of isolated torment, and re-establishes a human connection. In that moment of empathetic engagement, the wound begins to close, and as the king is healed, the waters flow again. The green returns to the fields, and life rushes back into the wasteland. This reframes the entire Grail quest. It is not an outward treasure hunt for a magical cup. It is an inward journey toward integration and wholeness. The knight must heal the wounded king within himself, that part of his own psyche that is cut off and suffering. He must ask the difficult questions of his own pain and guilt. The restoration of the land symbolizes the rediscovery of one's own vitality, creativity, and capacity for joy when inner conflicts are resolved. The quest, therefore, becomes a metaphor for psychological and spiritual healing, where the ultimate treasure is not an object but a restored state of being, a reconnection between the self and the world. But if the quest is truly about asking the right question, what happens when entire societies or secretive orders believe they have found the ultimate answer and possess the Grail itself? The path to the Grail was never a straight line on any map. It was a labyrinth of the soul, a series of surreal trials disguised as adventure. For a knight who swore the quest, leaving Camelot meant stepping into a world where the very rules of reality seemed to bend, where every forest path and lonely chapel held a hidden test. The journey typically began with the knight riding alone into the vast, trackless expanse known as the Forest of Adventure. This was no ordinary woodland. It was a psychological wilderness, a place of profound isolation where the familiar comforts of courtly society fell away. Here, the knight was stripped of his titles and retinue, left with only his armor, his horse, and his own untested virtue. The forest was deliberately disorienting. Paths vanished, landmarks shifted, and time itself became unreliable. A day could feel like a year, and a year could pass in what seemed like an hour. This forced solitude was the first and most crucial trial, compelling the knight to confront not external enemies, but the echoes of his own mind, his doubts, his pride, and his deepest fears. Guidance in this bewildering landscape rarely came from fellow warriors. Instead, it arrived in the humble form of a hermit, a holy man living in a simple woodland chapel. These hermits were more than just religious figures. They were interpreters of dreams and omens. A knight might stumble upon such a hermit after a confusing vision or a strange defeat. The hermit would not offer a sword or a strategy, but a spiritual diagnosis. He would listen to the knight's account of his dreams, often filled with symbolic animals or mysterious ladies, and explain their meaning as allegories for the state of his soul. He might reveal that the knight's recent failure in battle was not due to poor skill, but to an unconfessed sin, a hidden pride, or a lack of pure intention. The hermit's hut was a confessional and a classroom where the rules of celestial chivalry were taught, emphasizing humility, chastity, and compassion over brute strength and earthly glory. This guidance reframed the entire quest. It was not about conquering the world, but about conquering the self. The knight's progress was then measured through encounters that were less like battles and more like living parables. He might face a fearsome beast, not merely a dragon to be slain, but a symbolic creature. A lion could represent raw, untamed strength that must be mastered or befriended, not killed. A serpent might symbolize a lurking temptation or a buried sin. Sometimes the challenge was one of charity, like coming upon a wounded knight or a starving beggar. The true test was whether the questing knight, in his hurry to find the glorious Grail, would pause to show mercy to a suffering stranger, To ignore such pleas was an instant failure, proving his heart was fixed on the prize, not on the grace the prize represented. These episodes served as filters, weeding out those knights who sought the Grail for personal renown, leaving only those whose motivations were aligned with a selfless spiritual purpose. And then, when the knight was least expecting it, the landscape would shift once more. The tangled forest would give way to a misty river or a deep valley, and there it would appear, the Grail Castle. In the stories, it had many names: Carbonic, Corbenic, the Castle of Souls. It was never where you looked for it, it always found you. This castle existed in a liminal space, part dream, part reality. One moment it would be a shimmering vision of impossible beauty with shining white towers, the next it could seem a dark, ruinous fortress. Its appearance depended entirely on the worthiness of the knight who approached. For the pure in heart, it was a place of radiant welcome; for the flawed, it was a place of eerie silence and closed gates. The approach itself was a final trial, often involving a perilous bridge that seemed to be a razor's edge, or a river that could only be crossed in a boat with a mysterious, silent ferryman. Entering the castle was not an achievement of navigation, but an achievement of spirit. Inside, time stopped. The knight would be led through silent, torch-lit halls to a great chamber where the wounded Fisher King waited. Then would begin the silent, solemn procession, the pageant of the Grail, the ultimate test of perception and compassion. In this dream-like sequence, the entire quest culminated, not in a battle, but in a moment of profound witnessing, where the knight's entire journey was distilled into a single, breathless choice: to speak or to remain silent. Silence in the Grail Castle was a failure, but in the modern world, silence was the last thing the legend faced. By the dawn of the 21st century, the ancient quest was about to be reborn in a form its medieval authors could never have imagined, not as a spiritual allegory, but as the ultimate conspiracy thriller. The catalyst was a single, blockbuster novel, Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code. Published in 2003, it became a global publishing earthquake, selling tens of millions of copies and sparking a firestorm of debate, fascination, and outrage. Its central, explosive claim redefined the Grail for a new generation. According to Brown's fictional narrative, the Holy Grail was never a cup at all. The word itself, he proposed, was a medieval corruption. The true term was sangreal, which he passed not as sangreal, Holy Grail, but as sangreal, Old French for royal blood. The Grail, therefore, was not an object but a person, or rather, a sacred bloodline, the living descendants of Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene. In this telling, Mary was not a repentant sinner, but Jesus' wife and the bearer of his child, a lineage that fled to France and was protected through the centuries by a secret society called the Priory of Sion. The physical Grail of legend, the chalice, was merely a clever metaphor, a symbol for the womb of Mary Magdalene, the vessel that carried the holy bloodline. This idea did not spring wholly from Dan Brown's imagination. It was a clever repackaging of theories that had been simmering in alternative history circles for decades. The most prominent source was a 1982 book called Holy Blood, Holy Grail by Michael Bagent, Richard Lee, and Henry Lincoln. That book presented a sprawling historical detective story, claiming to have uncovered evidence of the Jesus bloodline and its protectors. Its own foundation, however, rested on notoriously shaky ground, primarily a series of forged documents planted in the French National Library in the mid-20th century, which fabricated the entire history of the Priory of Sion as a centuries-old secret order. Yet the power of the idea was undeniable. Why did this particular reinterpretation strike such a nerve in the modern era? First, it democratized the mystery. The Grail was no longer a relic for saintly knights or a vision for the spiritually pure. It was a genetic secret, a historical cover-up that anyone could theorize about. It turned the quest from an inner, spiritual journey into an external puzzle of codes, symbols, and hidden history, perfectly suited for an age obsessed with forensic investigation and uncovering the truth behind institutions. Second, it centered a powerful feminine principle. The image of Mary Magdalene as the sacred bride and mother restored a feminine element to a story that had become, in its Arthurian form, dominated by celibate male knights and a paternalistic god. For many, this felt like a correction, a recovery of a lost sacred feminine that resonated with growing cultural conversations. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, it offered a tantalizing alternative to Orthodox religion. It suggested that the divine was not remote in heaven but could be carried in human DNA, that the ultimate miracle was not resurrection but procreation. It framed established churches not as vessels of truth, but as authoritarian institutions that had actively suppressed this explosive secret to maintain power. The Da Vinci Code phenomenon was at its heart a perfect modern myth. It took the ancient, awe-inspiring template of the Grail and filled it with contemporary desires for conspiracy, for female empowerment, and for a tangible, historical connection to the divine that bypassed traditional faith. It proved that the Grail's greatest power remains its emptiness, its ability to become a vessel for whatever a culture needs to believe. And as this modern theory spread, it inevitably led seekers to a single, compelling question. If the Grail was a bloodline that fled to France, where exactly did it go? The answer would point to a landscape of soaring peaks and deep, shadowy caves, a place where history and legend blur into one. The shadowy corridors of the Grail Castle find a strange echo in the vaults of a different order of knights, one rooted not in legend but in documented history. Their name alone conjures an aura of mystery, the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, better known as the Knights Templar. Founded in Jerusalem in the year 1119, their original mission was profoundly practical, to protect Christian pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. They took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, living as warrior monks. Yet within a single century, they transformed into something unprecedented, a multinational financial powerhouse. They amassed vast estates, operated an early international banking system for pilgrims and kings, and answered to no authority but the Pope himself. Their distinctive white mantles adorned with a red cross became a symbol of fearsome military discipline and immense, inexplicable wealth. This dramatic rise makes their catastrophic fall all the more shocking. On Friday, October 13, 1307, King Philip IV of France, deeply in debt to the order, moved against them in a coordinated dawn raid. Templars across France were arrested on charges of heresy, idolatry, and obscene secret rituals. Under brutal torture, many confessed to spitting on the cross and worshipping a mysterious head or a bearded idol called Baphomet. The order was dissolved, its last Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, was burned at the stake and its wealth was seized. The historical record of their trial is a murky blend of coerced confession and political expediency. But in the vacuum left by their destruction, legend rushed in. Centuries later, storytellers and conspiracy theorists began to weave the Templars into the fabric of the Grail mystery. The theory is seductive in its symmetry. The Templars had their headquarters on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, the very site of Solomon's Temple. What if, during their excavations or renovations, they discovered something hidden deep in the ancient foundations? Not gold, but something far more valuable, the Holy Grail itself, perhaps buried there by the earlier keepers of the sacred lineage. This, the legend suggests, is the true source of their sudden power and wealth. Their banking network wasn't just a service, it was a front to manage and protect the immense secret they now guarded. Their mysterious rituals were not heresy, but the clandestine worship of this ultimate relic. Their famous secrecy was not to hide sin, but to protect history's greatest truth from a world not ready to receive it. In this narrative, the Templars become the missing link, the historical guardians who bridged the gap between Joseph of Arimathea's mission and the later Grail Knights of Arthurian romance. Their persecution and dissolution was not a punishment for crime, but a ruthless cover-up by a king and a church threatened by their secret knowledge. It is a compelling story, but does it hold up? The stark truth is, there is not a single piece of contemporary evidence from the Templars' own time that connects them to the Grail. The elaborate Grail romances of Chrétien de Troyes and Wolfram von Eschenbach were written while the Templars were a public, flourishing order, and yet these stories never mention them. The accusations at their trial, however outlandish, spoke of idols and heads, not of a sacred chalice. The link is a retrospective invention, a romantic fusion that emerged long after both the Templars and the medieval Grail cycle had passed into history. Yet the allure of this conspiracy is undeniable. It satisfies a deep human craving to connect disparate dots, to believe that behind the dry facts of history lies a grand, hidden narrative. The Templars were real, powerful, and destroyed mysteriously. The Grail is the ultimate symbolic treasure. Merging them creates a perfect storm of intrigue, where a historical puzzle finds its answer in a mythical one. It transforms the Templars from bankers and soldiers into the ultimate keepers of the secret, martyrs for a truth too dangerous for their world. And in doing so, it asks us a provocative question. Do we value the historical truth of the past or the powerful, enduring myth that grows from its shadows? But if the Grail is a secret, it must be hidden in a place that feels like a secret itself. In the soft, misty landscape of Somerset, England, there is a town where history, faith, and folklore have blurred into a single, powerful myth. This is Glastonbury, and for many, it is not just a location on a map, but the very heart of the Grail legend. The story begins, as so many do, with Joseph of Arimathea. After the crucifixion, the expanded legends tell us he was cast adrift from the Holy Land in a boat without sails or oars. Guided by divine providence, he and his followers landed on the southwestern coast of Britain. They traveled inland until they came to a strange, distinctive hill rising from the flat Somerset levels, a place the local Celts called Unis Witrin, the Isle of Glass, or later Avalon. Exhausted, Joseph thrust his staff, made from the wood of Christ's crown of thorns, into the ground. By morning, it had taken root and burst into blossom, becoming the legendary Glastonbury thorn, a tree said to flower every Christmas in testament to the miracle. Here, Joseph and his community built the first Christian church above ground in all of Britain, a simple wattle and daub structure, and here it is said he buried his greatest treasure. He secreted the Holy Grail deep within the earth, either at the foot of the great terraced hill known as the Tor, or somewhere within the sacred ground that would later become Glastonbury Abbey. This act of burial was profound. It did not just hide a relic, it planted it. The Grail became part of the land, its holiness seeping into the very soil and springs of the place. This legend brilliantly fused multiple layers of belief. The Celts already revered this area as Avalon, an otherworldly island of apples and immortality, the resting place of King Arthur. By claiming Joseph brought the Grail here, medieval monks connected their new Christian faith to the deepest, oldest magic of the land. They made Glastonbury a British Jerusalem, a site where the holiest treasure of Christendom sanctified native soil. For centuries, Glastonbury Abbey thrived as a major pilgrimage site, bolstered by the monks later claimed to have discovered the tombs of King Arthur and Queen Guinevere in the 12th century. The message was unmistakable. This was where the greatest Christian relic and the greatest British king converged. Even after the abbey's violent dissolution by King Henry VIII, the myth refused to die. Today, Glastonbury is a living tapestry of seeking. The ruined abbey arches stand as a skeletal monument to the official Christian story. The chalice well, with its iron-red waters said to be tinted by the Grail's blood, offers a gentler, perennial spirituality. The Tor, with its solitary tower, draws those who feel a more elemental, almost psychic pull. And winding through the town's eclectic shops are modern pilgrims of every kind, from Christians to pagans, from historians to channelers, all drawn by the same magnetic story. Glastonbury proves that the Grail's power lies less in being found and more in the act of searching. It is a geographical focal point for our longing, a place where the landscape itself seems to whisper that an ultimate answer is just beneath your feet, in the next turn of the path, in the next depth of your own belief. It turns every visitor into a potential Percival standing at the threshold of their own understanding. But what if the whisper from Glastonbury is not about a cup in the ground, but a pattern in the stars, or a secret held not by monks but by artists? Glastonbury may be the most famous claimant, but it is far from alone. The desire to pin the Grail to a map, to walk the very ground where it might rest, has sent roots deep into the soil of Europe. In the soaring Gothic nave of Valencia Cathedral in Spain, pilgrims and tourists alike can approach a quiet chapel to see what the church itself declares to be the Holy Chalice. It is a simple, elegant vessel, an upper cup carved from a single piece of dark red agate, mounted with a stem and base of medieval gold and alabaster. Its documented history traces it to a monastery near Valencia by the 14th century, and tradition claims it was brought from Rome by Saint Lawrence in the 3rd century, having traveled earlier from Jerusalem. Whether one accepts its authenticity or not, its power is palpable. Here, behind glass, is a physical answer to the legend, a tangible focus for devotion that has endured for centuries. A similar story unfolds in Italy at the Cathedral of San Lorenzo in Genoa. Its Sacro Catino, or sacred basin, is a stunning hexagonal bowl of brilliant green glass, long believed to be emerald and revered as the Grail. For centuries, it was the city's most prized relic until Napoleon's forces took it to Paris, where it was returned damaged, revealing it was not emerald but ancient glass. Yet, its story persists, a testament to how objects of beauty and antiquity naturally attract the aura of sacred myth. These cathedral treasures represent the official, institutional claim on the Grail, an attempt to bring the elusive symbol into the light of sanctioned worship. They offer a fixed point in the swirling mist of the legend, but other sites thrive on the opposite principle, on shadow and implication. Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, a 15th century masterpiece of stone carved with bewildering symbolism, was a relatively obscure historical site until a modern phenomenon cast it in a new light. The Da Vinci Code famously used Rosslyn as its dramatic finale, suggesting it as the hiding place of the Grail secret, the resting place of the sacred bloodline. The chapel's supposed connections to the Knights Templar and the Freemasons, though historically tenuous, fueled the fire. Today, visitors arrive with the novel in hand, seeing not just biblical scenes in the stonework, but hidden codes and messages. Rosslyn's true magic lies in this transformation. It has become a mirror for contemporary conspiracy, proving that a place can be physically real while serving as a perfect screen for our modern myths. Then there is the somber, windswept peak of Montségur in the French Pyrenees. This was the last stronghold of the Cathars, a Christian sect deemed heretical by the medieval church and brutally eradicated in the Albigensian Crusade. In 1244, after a long siege, over 200 Cathar perfecti were burned alive at the foot of the mountain rather than renounce their faith. In the 20th century, a new legend entwined itself with this tragedy. Some began to suggest that the Cathars were guardians of a great secret, perhaps even the Holy Grail itself, and that in the nights before the fall, a small group escaped the fortress with their treasure, vanishing into the mountains. While no historical evidence supports this, the emotional resonance is powerful. Montségur is not about a physical cup, it is about a persecuted faith and a lost wisdom. The Grail, in this context, becomes a symbol of pure, endangered knowledge, a light that was violently extinguished, leaving only a haunting question on the wind. From Spanish cathedrals to Scottish chapels to French mountain fortresses, this geographical spread reveals a profound human pattern. We are not content with a legend that exists only in stories. We need to touch the stone, stand in the chapel, climb the mountain. We feel a deep urge to localize the divine, to bring the infinite mystery down to a scale we can comprehend, a place we can visit. Each location, whether backed by papal decree or grassroots speculation, becomes a portal, It allows the seeker, for a moment, to step out of the mundane world and into the story itself, to stand where the ultimate secret might just be hidden, breathing the same air as the keepers of the mystery. And in doing so, we perform the oldest ritual of all. We turn myth into pilgrimage and a search on a map into a journey of the spirit. The quest for the Grail has always been a visual one, a story told not just in words but in color, light, and form. Long before the printing press, the legend lived and breathed in the flickering candlelight of monastic scriptoriums. Medieval illuminators, with their delicate brushes and precious gold leaf, gave the world its first glimpses of the sacred vessel. In manuscripts depicting the Last Supper, they painted a simple, often wooden cup on the table before Christ, grounding the moment in humble reality. But when illustrating the Grail quests of Arthurian romance, their imagination soared. The Grail procession in a manuscript of Chrétien de Troyes' Percival might show a radiant, gem-encrusted dish carried by a serene maiden through a castle hall, the wounded king watching from his bed. These images were not mere decoration, they were theological instruction and mystical invitation. They fixed in the medieval mind an image of the Grail as an object of blinding holiness, often shown emanating rays of light, a physical source of divine grace that the faithful could almost reach out and touch through the page. This artistic tradition kept the legend alive through the centuries, but it was a group of rebellious young painters in Victorian England who would redefine the Grail for the modern eye. They called themselves the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. Rejecting the rigid, formal styles taught by the Royal Academy, they looked back to the art before Raphael, to the detailed, luminous, and emotionally charged works of the early Renaissance and medieval periods. They were drawn to literary and mythical subjects, and the Arthurian legends, with their potent mix of romance, spirituality, and tragedy, became a central wellspring for their art. For the Pre-Raphaelites, the Grail was not a doctrinal symbol but a psychological one. Dante Gabriel Rossetti, in works like his painting The Damsel of the Sanct Grail, presents the Grail bearer not as a distant, saintly figure, but as a woman of intense, almost sorrowful beauty. She holds the covered chalice with a look of profound inward contemplation, her expression suggesting the weight of the secret she carries. The Grail here is shrouded, mysterious, and intimately connected to a feminine, introspective power. It becomes an object of yearning rather than conquest, but no artist became more obsessed with the quest than Edward Burne-Jones. Over decades, he worked on a monumental series of tapestries and paintings called The Quest for the Holy Grail. His vision is hauntingly atmospheric. His knights are not muscular heroes, but pale, slender figures with melancholic eyes, moving through dreamlike landscapes of tangled forests and still, reflective waters. In his famous The San Graal tapestry, the Grail itself is never fully seen. It is a radiant, golden glow emanating from an angelic hand, veiled in cloth, hovering above the heads of the awestruck knights. This was a masterstroke. By refusing to show the object directly, Burne-Jones captured its essential elusiveness. The Grail is pure aura, an unattainable light that illuminates the seeker's faces with a mix of wonder and despair. The Pre-Raphaelite interpretations were revolutionary because they shifted the focus from the object to the experience of seeking. Their Grail is wrapped in mood, symbol, and personal emotion. It is less a Christian relic and more a symbol of an ideal so beautiful and pure it forever recedes from grasp, a metaphor for the soul's own impossible longings. Through their lush, detailed, and deeply felt art, they revived the Arthurian legends for the Victorian public and permanently colored our collective imagination. When we picture the Grail castle today, it is often through the misty, symbolic lens they created. Their work asks a silent question that lingers: is the true vision of the Grail found in its blinding revelation, or in the forever unfulfilled, beautiful search for it? This artistic legacy would soon find a new and colossal stage, one that moved from the quiet gallery to the roaring, crowded cinema. The Pre-Raphaelites framed the quest in melancholy beauty, but the 20th century would bring a very different kind of vision to the legend, one projected onto a massive screen for millions. Film, with its power to create spectacle and forge instant myth, became the perfect medium to reintroduce the Holy Grail to a modern world, and few interpretations are more iconic or more wildly different than the twin pillars of Monty Python and Indiana Jones. In 1975, the British comedy troupe Monty Python unleashed Monty Python and the Holy Grail upon an unsuspecting public. This was not a respectful adaptation, it was a merciless and hilarious deconstruction. The film takes the lofty ideals of the Arthurian romance and grinds them into the mud, literally. King Arthur, played with sublime dignity by Graham Chapman, clacks coconut shells together to mimic the sound of a horse because the production had no budget for them. His knights are a bickering, cowardly, and profoundly silly bunch. The quest itself is constantly derailed by bureaucratic nonsense, like a peasant insisting on a debate about anarcho-syndicalist communes, or the infamous knights who say "nigh" demanding a shrubbery. The film brilliantly satirizes not just the story, but the grim, filthy, and pointless reality of the medieval world it pretended to ignore. The Grail, when it is finally glimpsed, is a cheap, tacky prop in a clearly modern French castle, guarded by a cartoonish animated god who shouts from the clouds. Python's genius was in exposing the absurdity at the heart of any grandiose quest. It asked, what if the noble calling was just a series of random, frustrating encounters? What if the divine sign was just a rude French soldier taunting you from a castle wall? By reducing the epic to the ridiculous, the film somehow made the ancient story feel more human and more relatable than any solemn retelling ever could. It acknowledged that the search for meaning is often messy, confusing, and patently absurd. 14 years later, Hollywood offered a completely different yet equally definitive cinematic Grail. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade presented the quest not as satire, but as the ultimate adventure serial. Here, the Grail is a tangible, powerful object with real stakes, a cup that can grant eternal life or bring instant death. The film masterfully blends pulp excitement with genuine mythological weight. It cleverly incorporates historical echoes, making the Knights Templar the ancient guardians of the Grail's location, and presenting the final test as a series of faith-based traps straight out of medieval romance. But at its heart, the film is about something more personal than saving the world. It is about a son trying to save his father. The quest for the Grail becomes the shared journey that finally bridges the emotional distance between Indiana Jones and his aloof academic father, played by Sean Connery. The final test in the Grail Temple is the film's masterstroke. Faced with a wall of countless chalices, the villain chooses a beautiful, bejeweled gold cup, drinks from it, and ages into dust. The Nazi scholar who aided him cries out he chose poorly. Indiana, remembering his father's research, selects a simple, humble carpenter's cup. He chooses wisely. This moment translates the entire spiritual allegory of the legend into a single, powerful visual lesson. The true Grail is not glamorous or ornate, it is plain and serviceable. Its power is not for the proud or the greedy, but for the humble and the faithful. It is a test of character, not strength or intellect. By making the final challenge one of perception and humility, the film stays remarkably true to the soul of the medieval story, even as it delivers thrilling action and a satisfying emotional conclusion. Together, these two films demonstrate the incredible elasticity of the Grail legend. It can be the subject of uproarious comedy that critiques blind questing, and it can be the centerpiece of a heartfelt adventure about faith and family. Film translates the ancient myth by focusing on the human experience within the quest, whether that experience is frustration and farce or love and redemption. The Grail on screen becomes whatever the story needs it to be: a punchline, a MacGuffin, a divine test, or a symbol of reconciliation. It proves that the legend is not a fragile artifact but a living story, constantly being remade in the image of the age that tells it. The silver screen gave the Grail thrilling new forms, but perhaps its most enduring power lies in a far more intimate theater, the human mind. In the 20th century, a Swiss psychiatrist named Carl Jung offered a revolutionary key to understanding why this ancient story refuses to let us go. For Jung, the Holy Grail was not a cup to be found in a castle or a bloodline hidden in history. It was something far more profound, a living symbol of the human soul's deepest desire, the desire for wholeness. Jung called this goal the self with a capital S. This is not our everyday ego, the part of us that makes decisions and navigates the world. The self is the total, complete personality, the hidden center that encompasses both our conscious mind and the vast, unexplored territory of the unconscious. It is the blueprint for who we are meant to become when all our conflicting parts are finally integrated. And the Grail, in all its radiant, elusive mystery, is a perfect symbol for this ultimate state of being. It represents the promise of becoming complete. This transforms the entire Arthurian quest from a medieval adventure into a timeless map for personal growth, a process Jung called individuation. Think of the knight setting out alone into the forest of adventure. This is the beginning of the journey inward, leaving behind the familiar comforts of the persona, the mask we show the world. In that dark, disorienting wood, the knight does not just face physical dangers, he encounters projections of his own psyche. The fearsome beast he must battle is not a literal dragon but his own shadow. The shadow is everything we deny about ourselves, our hidden flaws, our repressed anger, our secret shames. In the legend, this is the knight's own failings, like Percival's initial silence or Lancelot's forbidden love. To proceed, the knight must not destroy this shadow but acknowledge it, confront it, and ultimately make peace with it. This is the first, crucial step toward integration. And what of the central, haunting figure of the entire myth, the wounded king? In Jung's psychology, the Fisher King is not a separate person in a remote castle. He is the wounded aspect of the knight's own psyche. He represents a deep, inner brokenness, a part of the self that is cut off from life and vitality. His wound, often in the thigh, symbolizes a blockage in the flow of creative and emotional energy. His kingdom, the wasteland, is the internal state that results from this inner wound, a life that feels barren, joyless, and stuck. The quest, therefore, is not about healing someone else. It is about healing the wounded king within. The knight must travel to the deepest part of himself, the Grail Castle, which symbolizes the core of the unconscious. There he witnesses the mysterious procession, the symbols of his own unconscious contents coming to light. His crucial task is to ask the healing question, "What ails you?" This is the moment of profound self-reflection, of turning inward with compassion to acknowledge one's own suffering. When that question is finally asked, the inner wound begins to heal, and the waters of life, creativity, and meaning begin to flow again within. The wasteland blossoms because the seeker has become whole. This psychological interpretation offers a deeply personal, timeless meaning for the legend. It tells us that the ultimate treasure we seek is not out there in the world, it is within. The Grail quest is the journey every one of us is on, whether we call it that or not. It is the struggle to understand our darker sides, to heal our old wounds, and to integrate all the disparate parts of ourselves into a coherent, authentic whole. The Grail's enduring power lies in its promise that such wholeness is possible. It is a symbol of the fully realized self, shining at the center of our being, waiting to be discovered not by conquering a fortress, but by mustering the courage to ask ourselves the most difficult and most important questions. But what if the vessel itself holds a secret shape, one that points to a source of life far older than any chalice? Look at the classic form of the Grail, a wide, open cup. For many modern seekers, this is no accident. It is a profound symbol, a representation of the womb. this simple, powerful image reorients the entire legend. The Grail becomes not a container for blood, but a vessel of birth and regeneration, a symbol of the sacred feminine principle that gives and sustains life. This reinterpretation is a direct response to centuries of a spiritual narrative dominated by a singular, masculine image of the divine. In a religious framework where God is the father, the priests are sons, and the questing knights are all men seeking a paternal blessing, the Grail as womb introduces a vital, missing counterbalance. It suggests that the ultimate source of holiness is not a distant king in heaven, but the immanent creative power of the earth and the body. Scholars and writers exploring this path, like the theologian and author Margaret Starbird, argue that this feminine principle was not originally absent from Christianity, but was deliberately suppressed. They point to the veneration of the divine feminine in ancient cultures, from the earth goddesses of the Neolithic to the wisdom figures of Sophia in early Jewish thought. The Grail, in this view, is a surviving fragment of that older, more balanced spirituality, a symbol that managed to hide in plain sight within the masculine world of chivalric romance. This leads directly to the most provocative figure in this modern retelling, Mary Magdalene. If the Grail is the sacred womb, then who is its most logical bearer? The theory that Mary Magdalene was the wife of Jesus and the mother of his children, popularized in books and fiction, is just one part of a larger reclamation. For many, she represents the repressed feminine aspect of the Christian story itself, not a repentant prostitute, a label applied to her centuries after the Gospels were written, but an apostle in her own right, a companion who understood Jesus' teachings intimately and perhaps the vessel for his lineage. In this symbolic reading, Mary Magdalene is the Grail. She is the living container of sacred knowledge and sacred blood. Her suppression by the later, institutional church becomes the great spiritual crime, the reason the wasteland fell upon the world. The quest then transforms. It is no longer about a knight finding a cup to heal a king. It becomes a cultural and spiritual recovery mission. It is about rediscovering the lost feminine voice in our sacred stories, about restoring balance between the masculine and feminine principles of the divine. The wounded fisher king, in this context, is a symbol of a world sickened by an imbalance of power, where one half of the human and spiritual experience has been denied and wounded. Healing him requires not a question but a reunion. It requires bringing the feminine wisdom, symbolized by the Grail, back into the castle. This modern, feminist interpretation of the Grail is less about historical conspiracy and more about psychological and spiritual wholeness. It critiques the idea of exclusively masculine spiritual authority by asking a simple, powerful question: what have we lost by silencing half of the divine? The quest becomes a personal and collective journey to recover intuition, compassion, nurturing, and embodied wisdom, qualities often culturally coded as feminine. It suggests that our modern wasteland, with its alienation from nature and obsession with hierarchy and control, might be healed by drinking from a different kind of cup, one that reminds us of our connection to life, to the body, and to the creative, sustaining power that exists within and all around us. The search for wholeness is no longer confined to forests or cathedrals. It has migrated into our living rooms, glowing from our screens, and taken root in the most eclectic corners of modern spirituality. Today, the Holy Grail has been liberated from its medieval and Christian frameworks, becoming a free-floating symbol of ultimate attainment in a secular, searching age. In New Age circles, you are far less likely to hear about the Cup of Christ and far more likely to encounter the Grail as a concept of cosmic energy. It is spoken of as a frequency, a state of consciousness, or a blueprint for human ascension. Here, the quest is internalized and universalized. The Grail becomes a symbol of activating one's own heart center, of achieving a vibrational alignment that heals the self and, by extension, the planet. The wounded fisher king is recast as our own fragmented modern psyche, and the healing question is a call to meditation, energy work, or crystal healing. This transformation is profound. The Grail is no longer a relic to be found, but a potentiality to be unlocked within every individual. It democratizes the quest entirely, making every seeker their own Galahad, pursuing a personal, spiritual upgrade. This malleability makes it a perfect template for pop culture, where it is endlessly stripped of its specific religious context to serve a universal narrative function. In the sprawling worlds of video games, the Grail is the ultimate MacGuffin, the final artifact that drives the epic journey. The Final Fantasy series, for instance, rarely uses the name Grail, but it is filled with its functional equivalents, the crystal, the materia, the espers. These are objects of world-altering power, sought by heroes and villains alike, whose acquisition or protection forms the core of the story. They are plot engines that promise to restore balance to a blighted world, mirroring the healing of the wasteland. Fantasy literature and comic books perform a similar alchemy. A quest for a sacred cup might appear in a Dungeons & Dragons campaign, but so might a search for the lost ark, the Philosopher's Stone, or the Cosmic Cube. The specific object matters less than its role. It is the ultimate prize, the thing that will solve everything, grant unlimited power, or reveal the final truth. This is the Grail's core narrative DNA repackaged. It works because it taps into a fundamental storytelling pulse, the human drive to seek, to overcome obstacles for a reward of unimaginable value. The genius of the legend is that its structure, the remote goal, the series of symbolic tests, the final revelation of character, is infinitely portable. It can be draped in sci-fi chrome, anime aesthetics, or superhero spandex, and it still resonates. This constant rebirth in new genres proves that the Grail is not a dying myth but a living story tool. It endures because it is fundamentally about desire itself, the shape of our longing for completion, for answers, for a power that makes sense of chaos. Whether that longing is expressed through praying with crystals, guiding a digital avatar through a pixelated castle, or reading about a knight's moral trials, the essential pattern remains. We are all, in some way, still riding into the forest of adventure, hoping that this time the right question will be asked, the right challenge met, and the wasteland within and around us will finally bloom. Its power is not in being one thing, but in being all things at once. This is the final secret of the Holy Grail. It fascinates us precisely because it refuses to be solved. Think of it as a perfect, empty vessel. Across 1,000 years, we have poured into it our deepest collective dreams. When a society hungered for spiritual certainty, the Grail became the chalice of Christ's blood, a tangible link to divine sacrifice. When the age of chivalry sought a purpose beyond battle, it became a mystical test of purity for the perfect knight. When our modern minds grew skeptical of institutions and hungry for hidden histories, it transformed into a secret bloodline, a conspiracy at the heart of power. And when psychology turned inward, the Grail became a symbol of the whole self, a goal of inner integration. The object itself is almost irrelevant. A cup, a stone, a dish, a person, a frequency. Each is just a container for a different kind of longing. The legend's genius is its infinite adaptability. It is a story that welcomes every generation to write its own ending, to see its own face reflected in the polished surface of the myth. This is why the quest narrative feels so intimately familiar, even if you have never read a single Arthurian romance. We are all on a Grail quest of some kind. Your search for a fulfilling career, for a true purpose, for healing from an old wound, for a relationship that feels like home, these are all journeys into your own personal forest of adventure. You face trials that test your character, you receive guidance from unexpected sources, and you struggle to ask the right questions of yourself. The wasteland is not a medieval kingdom, it is that feeling of stagnation, of life losing its color and meaning. The healing we seek, the Grail we pursue, is the restoration of that vitality. The legend gives a timeless shape to this universal human experience. It tells us the search itself has value, that the path of trials is where we are forged, and that the ultimate treasure might not be a thing you find, but a person you become. And beneath all these personal and cultural layers, the Grail touches something even more primal, a yearning for direct, unmediated connection with the sacred. In a world that can feel increasingly fragmented and mediated, the idea of a single object, a vessel that contains the very essence of the divine, is profoundly comforting. It promises that the infinite can be held, if only for a moment. That grace is not an abstract concept, but something that can be carried, protected, and perhaps even found. Yet the Grail wisely denies us that final possession. It vanishes with Galahad, it remains buried at Glastonbury, it is always just out of reach in the next chamber of the castle. Its elusiveness is its greatest gift. A found Grail would be a disappointment. It would become just another museum piece, its mystery spent, but a lost Grail is a perpetual invitation. It forever whispers that the ultimate answer, the source of healing, the touch of the divine, is still out there, waiting. It keeps the story alive, it keeps us searching. In the end, the Holy Grail is a mirror. Gaze into its depths and you will not see a golden cup. You will see whatever you most need to see, whatever your soul most ardently seeks. That reflection, that projection of our deepest desires onto a blank, ancient canvas, is the true magic. It is why a knight still kneels in a ruined chapel in our collective imagination, and why we, centuries later, still lean in to listen to his story. The shimmering vision of the Grail has always invited a more practical kind of hand, one that wants to hold, to measure, to prove. While poets and mystics explored its symbolic depths, another breed of seeker took to the field with maps, shovels, and scientific instruments. These are the relic hunters, the historians and archaeologists who ask a very different question. Not what does the Grail mean, but where is the actual cup? Their quest is not for enlightenment, but for evidence. They operate in a world of carbon dating, material composition, and provenance, seeking to separate pious legend from physical history. At the forefront of this tangible search sits the Valencia chalice, housed in its Spanish cathedral. To the faithful, it is the Holy Grail, its tradition unbroken. To the scholar, it is an artifact that must earn its title. Scientific analysis reveals a fascinating story. The upper cup, the part that matters, is a simple vessel carved from a single piece of dark red agate, a type of stone. Art historians and geologists agree this stone cup is ancient, likely from a workshop in the eastern Mediterranean around the 1st century before or after Christ. It is undeniably the kind of cup a person in the Levant, even a well-to-do teacher, might have owned. The gold and alabaster mounts, however, are medieval additions from a later era, a beautiful case built for a revered object. So the science tells us this: the Valencia chalice is not a medieval forgery. It is a genuine ancient cup that was, at some point centuries after the life of Jesus, encased in precious metal and proclaimed to be the Grail. The evidence does not prove it held the wine of the Last Supper, but it does not disprove it either. It leaves us in a liminal space between faith and fact, which is perhaps the only honest space for such an object to occupy. This same scientific scrutiny has been applied to other claimants. The Sacro Catino in Genoa, long believed to be an emerald bowl, was revealed after damage to be brilliant green Byzantine glass. The Nantios cup in Wales, a simple wooden bowl said to have healing powers, was radiocarbon dated to the late medieval period, far too young to be a relic from Jerusalem. Each analysis peels back a layer of myth, often revealing a different, though still compelling, human story underneath, one of medieval devotion, of local folklore, or of simple mistaken identity. Yet the allure of a physical hunt is irresistible. Over the centuries, this has spawned expeditions and elaborate theories that read like adventure novels. One persistent English legend places the Grail not in a grand cathedral, but buried in the quiet, rolling landscape of the Shropshire countryside. The story centers around Hawkstone Park, a dramatic estate of red sandstone cliffs and deep wooded gorges. In the 18th century, a local rector claimed to have discovered an ancient manuscript hinting that Joseph of Arimathea himself had traveled here and hidden the sacred vessel. This sparked treasure hunts and speculation for generations. The theory weaves together the area's ancient history, with its prehistoric hill forts and rumored tunnels, with a romantic desire for a very British hiding place far from the chaos of the Mediterranean world. While no credible archaeological evidence has ever been found, the theory endures because it feels right. It fits the template of the legend, a remote, beautiful, and slightly mysterious landscape where a secret of such magnitude could lie sleeping. This is the pattern of the relic hunt. It begins with a local story, a strange carving in a church, an odd geographic feature that matches a cryptic description in an old text. The hunt itself becomes a performance of the myth, with modern-day seekers playing the role of Percival, interpreting clues and feeling the thrill of the chase. The scholarly consensus, however, remains firm and clear. For historians of literature and religion, the Holy Grail is overwhelmingly understood as a powerful literary and spiritual construct. Its evolution can be traced step by step, from Celtic cauldron to Christianized symbol in the romances of Chrétien de Troyes and Robert de Boron, to its full Arthurian integration in the Vulgate cycle. There is no historical record of a physical grail existing before these stories were written. The silence from the early church fathers, who meticulously documented other relics, is deafening. The consensus view is that the Grail was born in fiction, a narrative device that captured the medieval imagination so completely that it began to feel like a historical truth. This creates a fascinating and enduring tension, the tug of war between the heart's desire for a tangible sacred object and the mind's acknowledgement of a beautiful story. The relic hunter operates in this tension, often hoping that science will one day validate faith, that carbon dating will confirm tradition. Yet every time a chalice is analyzed, the result is the same. It tells a story about human belief, not divine intervention. The true excavation is not of soil, but of the human need to make the intangible tangible. We long to touch the divine, to have our spiritual yearnings confirmed by something we can see under museum lights. The physical searches, then, whether in Spanish cathedrals or English country parks, are not failures. They are a different form of the quest, a testament to the legend's power to compel action, to make us look, to make us dig. They prove that the Grail's call is so strong it convinces us it must be buried somewhere, waiting for the right hand to uncover it. And if it is not a cup in the ground, what other profound truths might its story be pointing us toward? Truths that could reshape our understanding of history itself. A land without a sacred history is a kingdom without a soul. In the turbulent centuries after the Romans left Britain, a new story was needed. One that could root a fledgling nation in something older and more powerful than military conquest. The legend of the Holy Grail arriving with Joseph of Arimathea provided that foundational myth. It did far more than entertain. It performed a vital political and spiritual function, giving Britain its own divine origin story. By claiming that Joseph, bearing the very blood of Christ, had walked on British soil and planted his staff at Glastonbury, the monks and chroniclers of medieval England crafted a breathtaking narrative. They asserted that Christianity arrived on these misty shores not through later missionaries sent by the Pope in Rome, but through a direct apostolic messenger in the immediate aftermath of the crucifixion. This was a claim of immense power. It meant Britain's church was not a daughter of Rome, but a sister. It granted the island a spiritual antiquity and independence that rivaled any European kingdom. In a time when political authority was deeply intertwined with divine favor, this was not just pious folklore, it was a tool of statecraft. A king who ruled a land sanctified by the Grail's presence was a king whose power was endorsed by heaven itself. The myth sanctified the territory, transforming hills and springs from pagan sites into Christian landmarks, weaving the holy directly into the geography of the nation. You can see this process vividly at work in the later Middle Ages, particularly during the reign of the Plantagenet kings, when the monks of Glastonbury Abbey claimed, in the 12th century, to have discovered the tombs of King Arthur and Queen Guinevere in their grounds. They were performing a masterstroke of mythic fusion. They connected the two greatest legends of British identity, the Christian Grail and the heroic Arthur, anchoring both in the same patch of earth. This created an unbreakable chain of sacred sovereignty from Joseph to Arthur to the current monarch. It told the people and rival nations that Britain was a chosen land, its history a continuous divine narrative. This use of myth to legitimize power is a universal human impulse. From the founding myths of Rome, with Romulus and Remus suckled by a she-wolf, to the divine right of kings claimed by monarchs across Europe, stories are used to answer a fundamental question: why do these people rule this land? The answer must reach beyond mere force or ancestry. It must touch the transcendent. By embedding the Grail in Britain's soil, the legend provided that transcendent answer. It said this land was special, set apart because it held the ultimate treasure of Christendom. The guardians of that treasure, by extension, were the rightful rulers. The legend's endurance in the British imagination, from Tudor propagandists to Victorian poets, shows how a potent story, once planted, can shape a nation's sense of self for 1,000 years. It turns landscape into legacy and political ambition into a sacred destiny. The sacred cup sought in the mists of Britain is not alone in the human imagination. Across vast distances of time and geography, cultures have dreamed of vessels holding the very essence of life and wisdom. This is a story told not just in the castles of Europe, but in the myths of the world. Consider the Greek cornucopia, the horn of plenty. Its origin story is one of miraculous provision. The infant Zeus, hidden from his devouring father, was nourished by a she-goat named Amalthea. In playful gratitude, the young god broke off one of her horns, imbuing it with a divine power. From that horn would flow an endless supply of food, drink, and flowers. It became the attribute of gods of the earth and harvest, a symbol that nature's abundance, when blessed by the divine, is inexhaustible. It answers the same primal hunger as the Celtic cauldron of the Dagda, a promise that the people will be fed, that the land will provide. Then there is the Hindu and Buddhist concept of Amrita, the nectar of immortality. In the great churning of the cosmic ocean described in ancient Sanskrit texts, gods and demons worked together using a mountain as a churn and a serpent as a rope. From the turbulent depths emerged many treasures, but the greatest was the Amrita, a liquid that conferred eternal life. The vessel itself is often less defined than its priceless contents, which the gods fought fiercely to keep from the demons. Here, the focus shifts from sustenance to transcendence. The vessel contains not food for the body, but the antidote to death itself, a drink that promises liberation from the mortal cycle. It is the ultimate transformative substance, echoing the cauldron of Ceridwen that granted wisdom, but pushing the desire further toward everlasting existence. Traveling into Persian mythology, we find the cup of Jamshid. Jamshid was a legendary king of Persia, a ruler of such wisdom and virtue that he possessed a magical cup, the Jam-e-Jam. This was no ordinary drinking vessel. It was said to be filled with the elixir of life, but its true magic was in its reflective surface. By gazing into the cup of Jamshid, the king could see the entire universe, past, present, and future, laid bare before him. It was a vessel of omniscience, a tool of divine sovereignty that allowed the just ruler to see all corners of his domain and govern with perfect knowledge. This cup combines the themes of immortality and wisdom, but adds a profound dimension of cosmic vision. It turns the vessel into a lens, a way of perceiving hidden truths and understanding the grand design of reality. So what do these distant stories, from the Mediterranean to the Indian subcontinent to the Persian plateau, have in common with a knight's quest in Britain? They all revolve around a sacred container that bridges the human and the divine. Whether it is the cornucopia's endless food, the Amrita's gift of immortality, or the cup of Jamshed's revelatory sight, each vessel provides something humanity deeply lacks and desperately desires. They are answers to our fundamental vulnerabilities, to hunger, to death, to ignorance. They represent a direct channel to a power greater than ourselves, a means of accessing a state of grace, plenty, or knowledge that transcends ordinary life. The Holy Grail, in this brilliant light, is not an anomaly. It is a particularly potent and complex variation on a universal human theme. It synthesizes these ancient longings. Like the cornucopia, it provides miraculous sustenance, feeding the fisher king a single wafer. Like the vessel of Amrita, it offers eternal life, both spiritual and, in some tales, physical. And like the cup of Jamshed, it grants a transcendent vision of divine truth to the purest knight, Galahad. The Grail legend took this deep, cross-cultural symbol and clothed it in the specific garments of medieval Christian Europe, weaving it into a narrative of sin, redemption, and chivalric testing. This global context does not diminish the Grail. Instead, it elevates it. It shows that this story taps into something foundational within us, a collective dream of wholeness that every culture, in its own way, has tried to name and to seek. The vessel may change shape from horn to cauldron to cup, but the thirst it promises to quench remains hauntingly familiar. The legend's most heartbreaking failure is not a knight who never finds the Grail, but the one who comes closest yet is forever barred from its light. Sir Lancelot, the greatest warrior of the Round Table, embodies this tragic paradox. His strength is unmatched, his courage legendary, yet his fatal flaw is a love so profound it becomes a spiritual prison. His devotion to Queen Guinevere, though noble in its passion, is a transgression against his knightly vows and the celestial purity the Grail demands. In the great prose cycles, Lancelot's partial visions of the sacred vessel are agonizing glimpses of what he can never fully have. He might approach the Grail castle, drawn by its power, but at the critical moment, a voice from heaven declares him unworthy, too stained by his earthly sin to enter. He is left outside in a swoon of despair while his own son, Galahad, achieves the glory forever denied to him. Lancelot's story is the ultimate anti-quest, a demonstration that the highest spiritual goals cannot be reached by martial prowess or even by a noble heart burdened with a forbidden love. The Grail does not judge the goodness of his affection, it reveals the incompatibility of his divided loyalties. He is torn between the human and the divine, and in that tearing, he becomes the legend's most poignant figure, a reminder that the path to grace often demands painful renunciations. Lancelot's tragedy is one of flawed purity, but other knights face a far more destructive fate in the shadow of the quest. The forest that disorients can also unravel a mind. In the sprawling narratives, we hear of knights who, after swearing the oath to find the Grail, simply vanish. They are not defeated in battle, they are consumed by the search itself. The psychological pressure of the endless, symbol-laden journey, the constant testing without clear answers, proves too much. Some are said to wander into madness, their armor rusting on their bodies as they babble about lights and cups no one else can see, lost forever in a personal wasteland of the mind. Their failure is not a moral one, but a collapse of the self under the weight of an impossible undertaking. The quest breaks them because they lack the inner resilience, the spiritual core, to withstand its disorienting trials. They sought an external object to fix their internal world, and when the object remained elusive, their world shattered. Then there are those who fail not from weakness or love, but from a corrupted intention. For every Galahad seeking divine union, there is a knight seeking the Grail for personal glory, power, or renown. In the Vulgate cycle, the mass exodus from Camelot is a brutal filter for such vanity. Proud, boastful knights who ride out expecting to conquer the Grail as they would an enemy castle are swiftly humiliated. They find themselves unhorsed by seemingly weaker opponents, their paths blocked by mystical barriers, or they are simply led in endless circles, forever riding but never progressing. The quest, in its divine logic, repels those who see it as a trophy. It reveals their ambition for what it is, a spiritual emptiness cloaked in martial pride. Their adventures become cautionary tales, showing that the Grail cannot be won. It can only be received by a heart made ready through humility and selflessness. This darker side of the narrative, these stories of obsession, madness, and corruption, are not flaws in the legend, they are its essential depth. They prevent the Grail quest from becoming a simple fairy tale where the hero always succeeds. Instead, they present it as a dangerous, refining fire. The value is not in the golden cup at the end, but in the brutal, revealing process of the search. The forest, the hermits, the strange encounters, they act as a forge. They burn away the dross of a knight's character, his pride, his lust, his selfishness. For Lancelot, the process brings tragic self-knowledge, a clear-eyed understanding of the choice he made and the grace it cost him. For the knight who goes mad, the forge's heat was too great and the metal broke. For the vainglorious, it reveals only base metal where they believed there was gold. These shadows emphasize that the true transformation demanded by the Grail is often one of surrender, not victory. It asks the seeker to relinquish the very ego that launched the quest in the first place, to move from wanting the Grail for oneself to being a vessel worthy of what the Grail represents. Every failure along the path, every knight broken or turned aside, underscores the monumental difficulty of this inner alchemy. The prize is not for the taking, it is for the becoming. And sometimes the only wisdom the quest imparts is the crushing, beautiful understanding of what you must leave behind to move forward, even if moving forward remains forever out of reach. This acknowledgement of ruin makes the rare success of a Galahad or a Percival not just a triumph, but a miracle. It asks us in our own lesser quests what we are truly seeking and what parts of ourselves we are prepared to lose along the way. From magical cauldrons to Jungian archetypes, our journey reveals the Grail's most enduring truth. It was never a single object waiting to be found. It is a story, a living, breathing narrative that has soothed and captivated the human spirit for over 1,000 years. This tale possesses a unique genius, an emptiness that allows every generation to pour its deepest longings into its form. When an age feared famine, it became a cauldron of endless plenty. When a culture yearned for divine connection, it transformed into the chalice of Christ's blood. When we turned inward, it became a mirror for the soul's quest for wholeness. The legend evolves because we do. Its power lies not in a fixed meaning, but in its infinite adaptability, its profound capacity to reflect whatever we need it to be. At its heart, beyond the knights and castles, the Grail carries a timeless, gentle message. The real quest is not outward into the world, but inward into the self. It is a journey toward healing the wounded parts of our own being, toward integrating our shadows, and toward discovering a compassion that begins with asking the simple, courageous question, what ails you? The restoration of the wasteland, the healing of the Fisher King, these are not events in a distant fairy tale. They are metaphors for the moment we choose to tend to our own inner wounds, and in doing so, allow our own lives to bloom again with purpose and connection. So perhaps the legend endures for this very reason. It does not exist to hand us a final answer, a golden cup that solves every mystery. Its purpose is far greater. It endures to keep us asking the right questions, to encourage us to embark on our own personal quests for meaning, healing, and wholeness. Your Grail might be a creative dream you are chasing, a relationship you are mending, or a peace you are building within yourself. The story's soothing power is its reminder that the search itself has value, that the path of trials shapes us, and that the ultimate treasure is not something you find, but someone you become. As this tale continues to be told and retold, we would love to hear your thoughts. Which interpretation of the Holy Grail resonates most deeply with you? Is it the sacred Christian relic, the lost bloodline, the symbol of the sacred feminine, or the map for psychological wholeness? Share your perspective in the comments below, and may your own quest be ever meaningful.